Test. Testing. Testing. Test. There we go. Alrighty. 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 Alrighty, testing. Okay, perfect. Alright. Let's get started here. put on a little turbo smooth. The problem is that you've always got to be careful with the number of polys you have. You can't use too few, or too many rather. I mean, you'll err on the side of too many polys, and you'll look better when you come to 3D printing. You get too few, then it starts to looks pixelated, and you get problems when you actually are printing it off a 3D printer. So that's something to keep in mind as you're modeling. Another thing to keep in mind is hangovers, things like this. The printer is not able to just start printing out over an edge without it falling apart. There's usually a good rule of thumb is 45 degrees, and then it can print in small increments. And basically, so if you take, let's say, this pyramid, for instance, the first level is printed like this, just a square, and then the next level begins little at a time, so it just keeps growing like this, eventually adding more and more to it as it shows horizontal lines. Let me get it like this. So that's basically right there is how they're going to build it. And so it builds this first layer, and then it builds another layer and another layer and another layer, and progressively goes on there. It has like it melts the plastic and then places it down there, kind of like hot glue gun. And then once you have that first layer that's solidified, then it goes to the next layer. Well, that's all fine if you're going in a ascending ramp like this, but if you're going the other direction, it has no problem about printing it up like this in an ascending pattern, but then once it starts to curl and print outwards, it'll have a problem, because if we were to make a pyramid and then flip it upside down, then you've got an issue right here, because it's going to print this first layer, but then when it gets to this second layer right here, there's nothing to support that, and gravity is going to naturally want to pull this thing down. So generally you want to try to get it no greater angle than 45 degrees. So you come in there with like a line. This is a 9 degrees, and I believe I got, let's see if I've got a 45. Nope, I just have the 90. But about yay angle, about like this, is as far of an angle as you want. Anywhere from in between those two right there is just fine. And you shouldn't have too many problems with the printer. Most of the printers will have a lot of problems doing something like that. And then what will happen when you print it at that steep of an angle, it will automatically print off supports. These are basically extra pieces of plastic. Yeah. Extra pieces of plastic that connect and support the bottom side of your model. So up here is your main model, and then down here are these like series of supports, and it fills up the whole thing. It's not just like this piece, and that's it. This whole thing would be it looks like basically a zigzag. It looks kind of like this. That's how it basically, this is the top view. This would be a top view looking down straight. So all this would be built underneath here. And that basically Oh, hey, Captain Awesome. Nice. That's fine. Late is fine. We're still rolling. We still got a couple hours. And we might even run a little bit late. So thanks for stopping in, buddy. So yeah, when you use these supports, they're easily able to be broken. That's the nice thing. So all these supports down here, you can basically just grip it and rip it, and they should be gone. So it's not that big of a deal if you have supports. Some things you just can't avoid getting supports, and it's just going to happen. It's inevitable. So back to the model. That's why I originally went with this route as we're making this tree. But with all these hangovers, you're going to have just a tremendous amount of problems with supports, and you'd have to clean out all this area in between this second tier and the first tier. And that just, you can do it if you want. You can go in there and, either take pliers or something like that, just pop those things right out. And if you have the right type of filament, support should be not an issue at all. It should be pretty easy to pop out. But if you can avoid it, and that's just one less thing you have to do, you can get right to it. And again, when 3D modeling, again with this, it's just for terrain, used like for role-playing games and things like that. You can stylize a little bit of the terrain and make it fit your particular art style. So if you want to make it really hyper-realistic, more than welcome to do that. If you want to do more of a cartoon anime style, it's the same thing, but in the end of it, it's just a matter of how you like it and what you think works best. This particular piece, the way it's modeled right here, is much more ideal for printing purposes than this, because it's less supports. So, all right, so we add our next edit poly modifier on here, and that way we can continue our project, and we can delete this if we screw up, backtrack it a little bit, and continue on that way. So here we go. So right now we're trying to just get a general loose look of the conifer tree, and this is basically just the general idea of it. 2 by 3 inches, something to fit very cleanly, more or less, on a battle map. So you'd already have your battle map laying on the table, and then these pieces would lay on top of it. You can try to do just pure scatter terrain, but the problem is with scatter terrain, then it doesn't quite fit perfectly on a grid. And unless you're doing some kind of wargaming, it's just not going to be very popular among gamers, especially role players, because they typically, if they're going to use any type of terrain, they want it to fit the rules that they're going with. And most of the games have a 1-inch grid, something like that, 25 centimeters or millimeters rather. So we're doing a 2 by 3 grid, and the idea here is to make it modular so that the trees will actually be removable, so that if a mini comes in here and wants to stand behind the trees, he can. But then if he wants to move underneath the tree, realistically in real life, you're going to be able to stand underneath the tree. But because these are miniaturized, there's no physical way you can shove a mini underneath there. It's only a couple millimeters in height. So we're going to go and make them so they're removable, and they'll leave like a little hole, but small enough that the mini will not fall into. They'll fit right on top of it. So here we go. And start working on, finish this one. Try to make it more of a ridge like that. I'm using, by the way, for anybody who's curious, I've got a space pilot controller, and that's how I'm navigating pretty quickly around the scene. I highly recommend getting one. You can get the super heapy cheapy one that's just basically a knob, and it looks like a little um, cylinder basically, and you can twist it and tilt it in any direction you want, and it takes over all of the navigation that you need to use in the program. So instead of going in and holding down control and alt and all that and doing your navigation using your mouse, there's no need to that. You can just use the actual space pilot in your left hand. And you really don't need to, unless you're just a hotkey crazy guy. You can just use a mouse in one hand and space pilot in the other. Alright, let's get this thing stuck out a little bit more. Right now, we're not worrying about too much of the smoothness because that's what the turbo smooth will kick in later and do that for us, and we'll modify it as we go. For now, we're just getting a general shape, and I'm doing it more of a cartoony style, I guess you can call it. It's not as realistic because, again, it's just basically set up for tabletop, just kind of a decorative look to it. And that's a nice thing about RPGs and things like that. I mean, yeah, you want realism, but let's face it. I mean, your mini is not going to be all that realistic to begin with. So why make the terrain super realistic when, for me at least, it's much easier to deselect that. We're done with that section. We're on to the next piece here. And because we like that height, we're going to go ahead and select the rest of these, making always sure that we're not selecting the backside. Just drag and see, I accidentally selected a little piece there. Always do F3 to wireframe back and forth. That way you can see whether you've accidentally selected stuff in the background like that, which happens a lot. You'll end up moving things on the other side of your model and you won't even know it until much, much too late. So, and I've got ignore backfacing on right now, which should mean that I'm ignoring all polys in the background, but doesn't necessarily mean that when you're dragging, like drag select like I'm doing right here. See, that worked just fine. Okay. So I've got them all selected on the first tier. We're just worrying about that for now. And we'll progressively work our way up. Hit your bevel. And we've already have our settings that I liked for this one, the general initial settings. So the nice thing is with Max is it remembers more or less what your settings are. So when you click it again, it just pops it right back up. And you're able to get nice consistency. And then from here, you can go ahead and, modify it all you want. I tend to sometimes do things a little on the long side. I know there's people out there that can just do this even quicker, and it's fine by me. Let's see, I want to get this to bridge upward a little bit. Since it kind of goes up similar to that. Great thing about trees is they're not symmetrical, and they might look like it, but they're definitely not. So you can change this little section to different than the other ones. Doesn't matter. I mean, if you're impractical or if you're imperfect, who cares? I mean, it's a tree, so you don't have to worry about too much getting it out of proportion. And a lot of this is just you're kind of almost guessing as you go, trying to paint as much of a picture as you can in your mind what you want this thing to look like, and then just kind of go with it. But again, I'm modeling for solely for 3D printing. So the style and techniques that you're going to be doing is going to be a little bit different than you would if you're just modeling it for a beauty render, you know, just a JPEG that you'll send out or post online. These are just going to be specifically built so they can become 3D models at a later date. And you've got to know what type of printer you're using, what type of plastic you're going to be using to print it off in, things like that, and then try to model with that in mind. All right, here we go. And actually, I've got another model. Shoot, I'll bring it in. Why not? I've already completed this one. This is one of the things I'm going to be posting on Simple Polytricks' Facebook page. Instagram, the usual suspects. It's a dwarf house that I built this week. Where is she at? There it is. This is what, like, basically a very large version of it. It's not really, it's kind of huge, actually. It's not printable. You'd have to scale this thing down. Guess you have to do it that way. You can see a little bit better. But yeah, I've gone in and added quite a bit of detail. This is where we're hoping to get at the end, but the same style. You know, it has plenty of detail to it, some mushrooms and fern trees, fern leaves and things like that. Guess you can see it. That's pretty bright. But you can see the detail of it. Why don't you change it from black? That would be one reason why you can't see it. So there you go. That's better. You build like a little squirrel. And again, you see how it's not, the birds and the squirrels are not detailed very much. It's not necessary to go in and go to that levels, because you're not going to be, this is going to be tiny. You're just going to have to see the figures themselves, and it's a general idea from a distance, because you're going to be sitting here at the table from, you know, probably this distance looking down on it, and you're going to see the outside figure of a squirrel, and that's about it. You don't need to see the detail. It's unnecessary. It's a waste of time. That's why a lot of those RTS games out there that have viewed out like this, if you zoomed in on them in the games, they would not show very much detail at all. So, alright, let's get this thing going. We're right here. Let's get the wireframe, F4 to turn on wireframe plus the folding. I've also got, up in the left-hand corner, there's facets, edged facets. I always keep facets turned on as the viewing version, because the default is default shading. And you can see, if I turn off the thing, you can see kind of a, it looks like it's blending everything together, and that's a no-no, because that's not how it's going to print. 3D Max makes it look prettier than it really is, because it's built for renderings, not for printing initially. So we always want to change that right off the bat to facets. That way we know exactly kind of how rigid it's going to be, and that's why we add a ton of faces to begin with, as best we can, and then try to sculpt our way through it. Alright. Something like that. There we go. Very nice. And as we go, we progressively add more and more detail. There's no reason to go in and add all your detail to begin with. For instance, we're not going to go in and add noise or bumps or really high detail to the end. We start out with the general shape. We mold it to be more specific as we go, and then we finalized with the minute details. We start on a macro level, and then we get down to a micro level at the end. And we do that because it's a lot easier to adjust things that are simplified, like these shapes here. If we go in there and start adding a whole bunch of bumps and things to it, well, you're going to have problems when you're trying to grab a whole bunch of polys, and there are thousands of them because we've added a turbo smooth, just like this. If I go in here and you see how many faces that thing is, and you're wanting to grab one, that's not gonna work. So you want to keep it simple to begin with, and then we'll add more later. Let's cut this thing because I don't really like how that's rigid right there. Turn on snaps, S for snaps. And we want to make sure, this is always tricky, but we always want to make sure that we're getting the middle of this edge here. And the way to know is that the whole line will light up. And if it doesn't, you don't have it. So in this case, we're going to go straight across and just cut it. Auto-saving real quick. So we joined it from there to there and we cut it. Now it's two polys that are triangle shaped. This one already looks like we did, but we haven't quite done it there. It just bent the poly. Bending polys are not that great. It's better to actually splice them, and then that way you can actually see the things. Alright, let's go here. In this case, we can actually make it a lot easier just by grabbing the polys here and doing my snaps and just pulling it up like that. And to bring in this piece, because we already know that this bottom piece is kind of in limbo. You're going to get supports from it. There's no way you can get around that the way I've got it built here. So you can go ahead and just pop those things out a little bit, so that, and we'll pop them out more as we go. Do the same thing here. Don't want that. Don't want that. Yeah, something like that. And then, instead of doing that last vertice, we'll do this one. That way we'll go up like that. And see, you don't like these type of shapes here. It's literally a polygon, but if you look at it from a different angle, it looks like a wedge. And that's definitely not what you want to do. That never happens to turn out well. So do one of two things. You can either cut the one piece into two pieces by cutting it from here to here, make it two polys, or you can just bring it up a little bit, and you'll see the discoloration start to. Once it goes like that, you know it's a pretty flat poly. You can get away with a little bit on the bend. Turn on edge so it stays there, and just kind of spread those things apart just a tad bit. And do the same thing over here. Basically, I just want to spread that out just a tad bit. There. Something like that. Save this thing. Make sure I don't, that's why. I got that bad boy hidden in there. Alright, that's good. This, by the way, is the size of my printing area. So I always build that to begin with, just so I'm always aware of the ratio of my printer space. This typically is the size of a mini. So I've got 1-inch squares right there, 1 by 1. So I want to make sure that that base fits, you know, more or less in that square. That way I know that this is the size of a typical figure. So that when I'm actually printing these things out, they're fairly to scale. Like, for instance, this thing is not even close to being to scale. I want to get it not like that. I want to make this thing way bigger than it is, which is why I have them here. Hide this thing. I want to get this thing to where it's not bigger. I want to keep the pine needles, if you will, within this 1 inch so that it fits in there and doesn't overlap another one. Because if a mini's standing right here in this square and this thing is overlapping, well, then you now cannot put it in the next square. And if it's overlapping here, it's probably overlapping on the green one too. And then that means you have 2 areas that you're taking up that you shouldn't. But yeah, I want it to both have the base smaller than this. This tree needs to have a base smaller than this so that when it fits into the hole right over there, that the mini will fit on top of the hole and not fall in it, because we don't want that. We just want it to sit on top, just be out of sight, out of mind. But we want the actual top part to be much larger. So we're going to go in here and again turn off, ignore back facing because that's what just happened. And we'll do that. Turn off constraints and then just bring it right on in. And that way we have the width, what we want, and then we can adjust the height however we want that, like that. And right now the tree isn't even close to being high enough, but we'll add more to it and then make it much higher. But for right now, we just kind of keep an idea of where these are at, and then ultimately I want it to be you know, something like, if I can get up there, I want it to be, you know, slightly taller than the mini, and that way it makes it feel like, yeah, that tree is actually blocking the way. So it'll work. So now we go into isolation mode again and go back to cleaning up stuff like this. See, this one doesn't like me, so we're going to cut that one. We can actually move this is a good idea. Yeah, sometimes when you cut, it does not seal, doesn't weld your vertices together like that. So now, right now, I've got 2 actual vertices that are separate, but they're on top of each other to make it look like they are. So we go in here and try to weld, and once we weld, we're good to go. There we go. Something like that. Alright. We need to take these things and make them higher. Not constraining. Just bring them out. You can also use your edge. See? You see how I accidentally selected something over there? Can always be careful. The good part about moving the thing around, your vision around as often as I do, is if you are selecting something way over there, your axes, these arrows, that controllers that you actually can move things around, it won't be anywhere near where you're selected. So it's something to keep in mind. And besides, it's just good practice to move about the screen and see everything from different angles and different points of views. And that way you know that you're coming in the right angle. And there we go. Now we're going to be going in between these with a different level of the same thing after we're done with these all the way around. We go in between and they raise up half the distance. So, like for instance, on this one, we go up like that high and then come out like that. Oops. See? Always look where you're going from different angles so you know which way you're going. Put something like this and lower the thing down. So now you've got two different levels of conifers, of branches, if you will. And that'll give you a nice little, you get a little bit of a difference to it. And you can push these things around too. I mean, you can get them nice and tight. You can get a third one, or one in between these two branches, if you really wanted to. What you basically can do is, if you go in there and select all of these, so you got all of them in the middle, and I mean, it's probably a good idea to maybe go down below just on that too. You're going to run into problems if you try to do farther up, but just right here, selecting these edges right here, you can go into chamfer. Now originally when you click chamfer down here, it's going to basically split the edge into two. And it's going to usually be a mess to begin with because Max just gives you a default of 1 millimeter, whatever one unit you have. You can just go in here and adjust it. But basically you make it 2, and then it puts a seam right down the middle. And again, you don't have to remember about this. Doesn't have to be perfect, and in fact you don't want this to be too perfect because you're making a tree. You're not making, a man-made object, so there is no perfection in this. It's going to be unnatural, and the more unnatural you can make it, the more realistic it's going to be. Even though, again, we're not going for realism totally here, we're just going for believability. They're going to be looking at this and accept it on the table. Yeah, it's a tree, looks pretty good, let's get playing. So once you get that done, then you can go back to the middle one. And see, there's a little bit of an issue right there, but we can move this vertice over a little bit and move it out so that it just basically falls around there. And really, there's no real need to have all these polys, because it's going right across here, and this triangle has a lot more. So I like to clean up from time to time, and I'm not afraid to delete polys, because you can always put them back in there. You can always create more polys. But for here, it should be this. It should be two polys. It should be this little piece right here, and then this little triangle right here. Should be your two pieces. So you can go over here in your panel up here to create, and if you want to use snap, you can. Oops, a little sensitive there. You're mainly just trying to make sure you get onto these corners, and it's this white, these 4 pieces here. You just click, 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 and click, and there's the poly. And you want to do it same thing for the other one. Click, 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 and deselect. F3 to come back to your view, and then that way it's a little bit cleaner. You don't have near as many extra polys that you don't need to. And even though I was mentioning earlier that you can't, you don't want to go too low of polys, you want to add as many as you can for printing purposes. There's a difference between having not enough polys and having wasted polys or inefficient polys. So you want to make sure it's clean as you can get. So now back to this middle piece. Now that we've got that, again, we can clean up this actually real quick. There's no need for all this, because again, it's the same thing as last time. Just go in here and click on the corners, and then in the same breath, you can keep going. Make your 2 pieces there. Oops. Deselect that. Now, once again, interesting. Get rid of that. Sometimes I've seen this happen. This is part of the wonderful part of playing in Max, is that sometimes you'll see either you've clicked on something, which I think I have. I think I clicked on placement. And as a result, yeah, that's what it was. So I clicked on select and place, a tool that I don't ever use, but when I was right-clicking the menu, accidentally trying to deselect, I was a little bit hastily clicking on the wrong thing, and as a result, I was having trouble clicking on edge. But now that I've got that under control, I can do that. Now we can go in. Never ends cleaning up, right? Never ends. On this, we can really clean up. We can just delete all that. We can just go to vertices, and we're basically just going to combine all four of those areas right there into one. We use target weld over here. That way you can basically just drag a vertex. You pick a vertex that you want, click, and drag over to the one you want it in, and it automatically will fuse it together. You want to do it with there and there, and then there's this random, hey, what's up, man? Aaron's on, go Blues. Here we go. But yeah, you don't want to have this extra vertex right here. you need to have it as an intersection, like all these other places right here. And the reason is it's doing nothing, it's just sitting there in limbo. So you want to always weld all your vertices so that they're at some kind of an intersection of some kind. All right, so now that we've got that little piece there, we've got our edge selected. And again, we can go in here and we can do just one of two things. You can either move this thing outward. And again, it doesn't really matter how rugged it is because it'll be smoothed out later. We're going to test it out real quick, see what it does. So you go in here and add a couple of basically there's a spot in there that just kind of throws the rest of it off, and again it gives it more inconsistency in the whole premise of the tree, so that once we get to that level, again merge this thing in there, we can actually reference the other tree that we had incoming. Big file, where you at? There she is. We can bring this in again, and again once we capture all this, then we can see that they're like in this particular tree, you've got all the different ridges and stuff like this for the bark, and you can see there's absolutely no conformity on it whatsoever, and that's because it's nature and it doesn't have any man-made features to it, so there is no true perfection. There's nothing out there measured. So you go in there and you can make your tree as imperfect as you want. Now personally, I don't really want that extra piece there. Let me see, you can just undo, turn that off, go back to the edges, and if we don't like it, we just push it right back in, and that's just part of it. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything for it to be there. It is no different having that little seam there than the one next to it over here on the left that has a seam. Turn these on so you can actually see the wireframe a little bit better. These three seams right here, it makes no difference to have this three than just having the one, other than when you turn on Turbo Smooth, it may have a little tighter area right here on the right than it is on the left. The nice thing is you can actually remove unwanted seams. So you can go in here and, for instance, take these that you really don't want. Let's say you just don't want that. There's actually a remove seams button over here. And when you click Control, you hold down the Control button and then hit Remove. It removes it for you and automatically fuses the polygons together to the next available polygon. So you don't have any mess, just like that. You do it with the other side too. If you go in there and select this, I'm going back in this because after doing it, I really just don't want to do it. Doesn't look good. Don't like it. Hit Control, Remove. And for the most part, it removes it, but you see there's a couple of pieces here that are, they're a little bit wrong. They're a little bit off right there. And that was probably caused from when I was creating the polys to begin with. I've created 2 polys there. And that we'll go in here and start doing some investigating just to see what. We can go in here and actually, now that we know that we're not going to be doing this, we can actually just delete those polys that we just made a little bit ago. That's part of modeling there, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes you have to go back and Sherlock it is. That's right. And that happens. So we'll go in here and weld our vertices together here. Zippity-doo-dah right back into it. Do the same thing for the bottom. Go to vertices, go to target weld, and just drag it right over all 4 pieces, making sure that you do the right ones. And we've basically restored that all the way back to what it was. There's a little piece down here, but I don't think that's really going to matter. You won't even see it because when you print this bad boy out, you'll be looking at it from the top. You won't be looking at it from the bottom. And again, when it prints out, that won't even be there. You'll just see the ridges of the actual bark once we get to that part. So easy peasy. But we definitely want to put one in between each one of these sections as we go along. All right. For now, I'm going to add another edit poly modifier, and this again is just so we can backtrack. You want to add as many as you can. It's a lot easier to add more of these editable polys, so that you just turn them off. You can just delete them, and that way, once you make a mistake, like if I went too far in there and I couldn't go back into doing it, you could either restore a saved file, or you can just make it easy and just add a poly, and that way it's a real quick. You don't have to sit there and wait for loading times and save a whole bunch of different max files, which are really large in general. All right. So now let's go back. We were done with that one. We're working on this one. We need vertices. We're going to go in here. We're going to move these up so that it looks like it's just a piece and just coming down naturally from the top tier. This is where the second level of branches will stick out. And again, it looks kind of like a pagoda, but it'll look more like one of those trees in the background when we get done with it. Because we can go over here and again, this is an oak, so it doesn't have the conifers to it, but it is very similar in the fact that you can actually see underneath. There's little ridges, and just pops it up there. That's what the bark is, but it's the same principle with the conifer branches. They'll have a little bit of a pop out in various ways. We'll do it that way. Alright, I'm going to hide this out of the way so auto-saving doesn't take near as long to do it. Aaron, what's going on, man? Just decided to hop in on a Saturday afternoon. Let's see. Bring that back out. Alrighty. Well, we're just broadcasting for another hour and a half or all. It's not going to clearly be done, but now that I'm going to start broadcasting Mondays and Wednesdays, 6 to 8, yeah, basically you'll learn something if you come in here long enough. You figure out how to do 3D modeling on your own. But yeah, we'll be broadcasting Mondays, Wednesday nights, 6 to 8, 2-hour sessions. Even though it, like that tree I showed, yeah, you probably would go in here and just work all day on this stuff. That'd be fine with me. Take the job, I'll just own the job and do all the work. Get that front part out, back part in. We're just kind of getting a little rounded area. Absolutely no reason to go in there and do branches and needles, and that's just unnecessary, and it would never even show up on a printer anyway. Because you can only print something like 0.2 millimeters, which is really small to begin with. I mean, that's a really finite, really small, minute is the word, printing area. But if you get down that small and you start making little bitty needles and things like that, it's just the plastic's gonna meld together. It's not gonna separate very well between the two. So you're not gonna be able to really show the conifers. Now, once we get all this done, we can fake it by extruding a whole bunch of different needle-like appendages out of this area. So it'll look like needles are coming out of it, but in reality, it's just one solid piece that just has a whole bunch of bumps to it. So, easy enough. Alright, how many more I got? Way too many. Alright, here we go. Bring this back up. Get some inconsistency into it so it looks natural. Yeah, you can use all the different colors. I mean, it defaults to green, but then it basically if you make a new object, Max has the ability to automatically assign it a random color depending on what you make. And then you can take all of these and change them to, let's say, yellow. And that usually is really beneficial, because especially when you have a whole bunch of different pieces and you want to select just one and identify one piece, you can go in there and have a whole bunch of different colors. Now this is one object, so you would have to get more complicated to assign different areas to have different colors. So usually one object has one color, but you can change it to, let's go, St. Louis blue style. Problem is, some of the colors on here aren't they don't show detail very well. You can see how dark the blue is. Even though it's not very dark blue, it doesn't show the details very well. Sometimes I use a lighter color, even if it's a blue one, just to change it. Yeah. So if you go in there and change it to, like, some of these colors are not good at all. The blue is very difficult to see, and you can't see. I mean, you really can't see a lot of the details. Just too dark, and I can barely see between these two dark polygons, for instance. I mean, they're close. I mean, I can see the top one's a little lighter than the bottom one, but just by glancing at it, it looks like one piece. And it doesn't really show off very well. So usually lighter colors are the best to be able to, the lighter the better. If you can go real light, you can actually see the pieces a lot better that way. And then when you print it, it'll print an entirely different color. I mean, whatever plastic color you want, you pick it whenever you're printing off things. So if you want it to be, a blue, then you can use blue as a filament, and it'll print off an entirely different color. This color here is completely immaterial to your printing, because once I take this and send it to the printer completely forgets and ignores what color this is to begin with. Has no care at all about what color I picked. And then what it does care about is what color of plastic I input into the actual printer. That's all it cares about, and then prints that off. So eventually I would start adding what's called materials to it, and you can assign all kinds of crazy materials that make it look realistic, like actual pictures of conifer. And that's where you get your realism when you do your renderings and things like that. But again, adding materials and things like that you see in video games, like textures of rocks and stuff like that, completely immaterial when it comes to 3D printing, because you cannot print the actual textures that you assign in this program. It will not go with the file when you export it to the printer. So you don't have to worry about any textures or anything like that, realism in that regard. All that matters is the modeling itself. How many faces you use, which polygons, another name is faces because it takes, you don't see them, but there's every one of these squares, there's technically a face, two faces. And it essentially, if I cut this thing in half, that would be one, that would be another face, and together it forms a polygon. So you can either call it a polygon or a face, one of the two. Some people call one or the other. But yeah, it just matters on how many polygons you use, level of detail. And if you model this thing out like a video game with low polys, ready to be optimized to run on a PC or something like that, you're going to have problems because it's going to print off like a PC. You're going to have this low poly. I mean, it's going to look like this. You're actually going to see the ridges that are in these, all these triangles and things like that. You're going to see that in the printer. It's going to be really rough. So that's why we add the turbo smooth to begin with and add just a ton of levels to it. And you can see the different levels from one level of smoothness to the next to the next. And we'll add tons more faces to this before we print, because it needs to be as smooth as possible. Alright, we got that one. We need to move these up a little bit. So let me move that. That's alright. Just like that. Last one. This one will just go up like that. Doesn't matter. Just making it up. Again, we've got reference that we keep going back to. Let's make it smooth. And basically, we're optimizing to get to this general concept. We've got a 2x3 block, which is going to be basically this shape, this size. And there's going to be 3 different trees on two of the squares. And then they're going to be removable so that they leave a little bitty hole there. And this tree will have like a peg underneath it once we get done with it, a little cylinder peg, and it'll fit into a hole into this particular grid here. And the idea is that you can move this thing out of the way and replace it with a mini who sits in the spot. And then once the mini moves to a different target, to a different square, you can bring the tree back in, because in reality, it's, all right, man, we will see you then. Thanks for coming in, dude. I'll give you a holler later on. But yeah, you'll have this cylinder basically in the bottom, like this. And it will be attached. It'll be attached to the base of this, so that it just, the whole thing will come down into a hole and fit into it. And then that way it doesn't move around like so. Easy enough. All right. We have everything. We still got that bad boy. Take care of that. Hide that one. Isolate. Back at it. Just go in here and fill her out. Okay. A lot of this modeling, unfortunately, has a monotonous or a tedious method. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer than others. Cut this thing right there, or right there. There, a little bit cleaner. That's better. A little blurry. That's better. Ooh, pull it out. Push it in. There we go. Around these corners just a bit. There we go. Save it because I can't remember when the last time we saved it. And that's all of them. Look at that. Have not done this one up yet, but need to. And then increase. And then increase. Don't want him. Just like that. All right. I do like this little area here. Ooh, mercy. I do like this little area spread out just a tad bit on certain ones. A little bit more sprinkle. It's looking more like a Christmas tree. Alright, what are we doing here? We need to cut from here to here, from here to there. And we do that because we're going to try to bring in, similar to what we did earlier, make another edit poly so we can continue on. And all that's done on that. And we're going to try to split this bad boy right here. You don't need all of this. Make sure we just got that section. And the bottom one too, that's not going to hurt anything. I just don't want it any farther than that. And now we chamfer. Again, it defaults to 1 millimeter. And that's not good. So we knocked it back to 0. And bring it back out more. And make sure you have a segment in the middle. Now we got an issue right there, but we can clean that up later. That's not so bad either. We can clean that up in a bit. So we leave that as it is. And now we go to poly, remove all these pieces here. And then again, we want to target weld over here. But this time, all we're going to be doing is taking one of these, and it doesn't matter which way you're going. You can put it either way, just as long as it gets out of the way, and these two pieces are connected by a way of an edge. And then move this up so that it's nice and level. Move that one down as well. And then we need to create polys to close the gap. Just like that. One more. Just like that. And we can leave these triangles. It's not the end of the world. I mean, especially when it's out of sight and out of mind like that. And again, this one, and we may fix that. Actually, it's probably a good idea to fix it here. What we can do is we're looking to minimize an unnecessary poly. So instead of it being this oblong one, we're looking for either a square of some kind, even if it's oblong like this, rectangle rather, or a triangle. Those are our two goals here, to keep things looking clean. And since there's one there, we always want to make a poly from the intersections, from the vertices of these pieces. So we're putting them all together like that, so it's a nice triangle instead of having all those extra polys on there. It's completely unnecessary. It doesn't look very good. All right, let's clean this up just a tad bit, just a tad. And now, double click that to select it all. Deselect all the extra stuff that we don't need, which is all of this. It won't matter, but I'm going to clean this up anyway, even though we don't have to. It tends to look better when you get things to look cleaner, like that. Now we've got a nice clean area. Alright, for this one, we are going to just try to pull this thing out. Turn off constraints, or it'll just go right up the alley, or just basically just looking to bring it out. It's okay if it's sharp. We'll smooth it down in a bit. Plus the turbo smooth will help out once we turn it back on. But we're basically just wanting to have some kind of a intermixing area. Now, one of the options you can do to make it a little smoother is you can turn on soft select over here. Turn down the fall off so that it basically will affect just the areas in color. And it's color coded so that the farther away from orange, the less it's going to be affected. So when you move it, it moves several, not just that one. And it kind of gives you a little bit better gap there. Kind of like that. We need more, so we're going to increase the fall off. And bring it out like that. Try to round these pointed edges a little bit. Get it back out. There. There we go. Move it to one side. That's looking good. And again, always check with your turbo smooth. Turn it on every now and again. Crank the thing up. Kind of get an idea of what you're going for, what you're hoping for. And again, we're not getting for precise yet. We'll get to that. We're getting there. One of the things I missed on the last time, but I'd like to fix this, is this one right here. This big one right here. Yep. That doesn't look like the one. It is. Okay. And basically I want to pull it out a little bit more. There. It's not quite as flat. Same for this one. Okay. Another method that you can use, instead of going this method where we chamfered, we can actually use what's called an extrude, and it does it actually a little bit easier. Let's turn off soft select real quick so it's just whatever we have selected. It's not going to interfere with the other edges that we're selecting here. And instead of chamfer, we're going to go to extrude. We're going to push the settings next to it to the right of that. And now we're going to, the bottom number spreads out just like we saw with the chamfer, and then the top one will actually jut the thing out. Just like that. You can extend the width of it and bring it out a little bit. Works really well. And now you've got a little bit of inconsistency there, and that's always a good thing. It's not a bad idea just to bring some of these down just to give you something to look at underneath. Actually, we want to avoid the middle one because we haven't brought those down yet. Because we're dealing with this area next, so we want to just worry about this area first. Sometimes you don't want all of them. You just bring down a couple. There. And now you've got a little bit more randomness. Disruption. Alright. Now, we did that. It's right there. So we're going to work on this one. And we'll use that same method with extrude. And to get that set up, we can go back into our soft select, turn that on, and try to bring it out. Try to bring it out a little bit more. The nice thing about Max is it has a ton of different ways to do the exact same thing, and it caters to your preference on what you want to do and how you want to go about doing it. And that really appeals to a lot of graphic designers and 3D artists because we all have our own opinions and preferences, and works out real well that way. Just like that. You know, I just decided I want to add, let's see if we can add another one right here. Oops. I don't want all that. I just want this and this. I just want this little spot here. Try not to get it too crazy. Yeah. And then add a little bit. Even it a bit. Looks weird on your end, but it's still looking fine in general. Again, you're just looking for random pieces. And then if we go to default shading, we can actually see just how smooth it goes. You can also do it this way. And this does it sort of reversed. So instead of taking the seams, you're taking the polys, and you're going to bevel them out, which is a type of extruding that is tapered. So you basically bring them out like that. So it's similar to what we did earlier. We don't want to bring it out that much. It's supposed to be less. And then you can taper just a tad bit. And that will get you a different result, but again, it's the inconsistency that we're looking for, so it's okay. We just don't want too much rigidness. We want some fluidity in the model so that it looks natural. Do the same thing here. Bring it out a little bit. Extrude a little bit. Oops. And bevel just a tad bit. You don't go too far, because then if you bevel this in, then it'll start overlapping itself. Like this. Like that. And that's not good. When the two edges are overlapping, you want it to bevel, but not too much. And you really don't need that much. I mean, it's good enough. And if we really needed to, we can go in here and select the ring. We're just basically selecting all the edges that are on the piece that we just worked on. I want all this extra stuff gone. Just want it on what we were working on. I don't even think I want it on that. I just want it on these pieces here. And then we can do connect, and that basically slices it right down the middle. I'm going to get rid of this because it's all hanging over anyway. So we want it to hinge rather than actually hanging down like that. It's better to keep things at an angle rather than just straight drop-offs. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in 3D printing at all without any complications. So go in here and try to get this all taken care of. Oops. There we go. See how far we can pull this down. There we go. Interesting. Might be able to work on something like this. Let's see if we can't get this. This might actually work. So again, we're always thinking about supporting things that are overhanging. You know, we might be able to go ahead and bring these pieces up a bit and bring them out because they're going to be vertically shafted. There's like a vertical shaft of plastic right here. So you might as well see about bringing these up a little bit more. I got something else selected. It's way over there, a little rogue vertex. And that's why, because I did miss that one. I clicked on the wrong one. So you can go in and do this and bring these down a little bit or up. Something like that. And that way you have added support without it looking like added support from underneath. You can extend the pieces out a little bit more. And you don't have to do it for all of them, just some of them. I'm going to do it for these, and especially when you can use the poly extrude or the poly bevel, something like that, because then it's naturally going to have a little piece here on the top, little resting spot for pieces to go ahead and sit on. And again, we don't want to have hangover down here. Get rid of that. And then we want to target weld. Do it that way. Bring these pieces up a bit. Smiling now. Bring these pieces down. This one way down. Something like that. I don't like that, so I want consistency. I want one to look like the other, like that, to a little bit extent. But then there are pieces like that. So we want to create a side like that. So it's a side like the other one, and then just combine the two. Like that. Now you got a nice little area here. Go in here and just add a little pop out right here. Ooh, let's see again. It defaults to too much usually, and you really just want to, especially when these pieces are close together like that already, too much beveling and it'll overlap itself in a crisscross. So you want it like that, and then oops, get the edge. Select ring, and then I'll select in a straight line all of those pieces, which you just want that. And that, and then connect it. Simple enough. Bada bing, bada bing. Get rid of all this. Get tight in there. And clean up our mess. Make sure we look okay. All right. Into the final hour. I'm just going to skip a few pieces here. Get to work on the rest of the place. Always come back to it later. There we go, there we go, there we go. Simple. Alrighty. Save. It's coming along. the bottom piece is pretty much done, and now you just move on to the upper pieces and hope that the pieces all line up right. Right now it just kind of looks like a ice cream cone. Let's add another edit poly. Now for the second part, this area here, we're trying to make it bump out in a general pattern. So for instance, now we're going to hinge it from this point, so it's going to stay right there and then just come out a little bit and up. So we're going to extrude all this, and then we're going to bring this edge back down to weld back at this point. So it'll come out like this, come down and around. It'll be this big area, kind of like, I don't know, kind of like there. And we've got a high enough degree here. We should be okay with the way it's going to print. So we should be all right. I'm going to bring these pieces up, similar to the other one, like down here. And probably bring it up quite a bit more. Like that. And you see the different levels. Now you can see what I'm talking about. So, there we go. Moving on. I personally do not want to have them completely on top of each other, because that's, again, uniformity, and that's not really accurate when it comes to nature and these type of trees. Like that. It's a little off, which is good. And may want to build one right here as well. Yeah, let's see what that does. Yeah. Again, we want to hinge. I'm going to keep this at an angle. So we're going to go and target weld. go. Oh, here we go. Just like that. Just like that. Like it like that. Now it's coming around. Now we've got the height, and that's basically where I wanted it. I wanted it. I mean, it'd be nice to go bigger than the mini, and I can. I could make it more narrow and stretch it out like this. Can make it narrower, but then stretch it out so it's like that. And we may do it on one of them, but for now I want it to be this size, and that works out real well. And just barely bigger than the fig. And if I'm sitting on this side, I mean, yeah, he's going to be clearly seen, but again, it's purely for having a better visual of, you know, being able to stand behind trees and hide and things like that. So it'll work perfectly for what we're accomplishing. All right, next. Let me get rid of these polys before we start target welding, because otherwise you'll have a little bitty thin polygon in between there that you won't be able to see, because it'll weld the vertex. Oh, there you are. I am making a tree. I know that's really exciting, but our goal is to make a 2x3 piece that will fit onto a battle map that's already drawn. Someone that already has it. Oh, I am excited too. I'm glad you're here, man. Glad you could make it. Yeah, we're going to be making this little modular area so we can take the trees off. That way a piece could actually fit onto the area where the tree is whenever they move onto the tree. Because obviously you can stand underneath the tree. So we'll be able to just remove these. The tree is going to have a little cylinder built underneath it that will fit into a hole on the terrain piece itself, so that it will fit on perfectly, and then whenever you want to remove it, you just pop it off, move the figure onto the spot, and then when the figure moves away, you put the piece back on its place. Exactly, and magnets are perfect for it. If anybody wants to, I mean, it's perfectly capable of sinking a magnet into it, and you can actually glue them on there just fine. You can sink them onto the bottom of the tree instead of uh, actually having a peg in there. But yeah, the trees are strictly going to be there so that people can say, okay, yeah, there's three trees that's kind of blocking people's view. Things can hide behind it, and then the DM or whoever the keeper is running the game can actually reveal the pieces as they go. Um, so right now we're not making anything exciting. I will show you this since you're here. I've only brought this in like 15 times. I built this other piece that's going along with. Um, I'm making a series of collections of terrain pieces, and those collections are going to be available individually and as a whole at the next Kickstarter. So they'll be themed, so they all fit one theme. Like forest is one of them. Yep, I'm going to do a new Kickstarter in the fall-ish, and much better. And this one is going to be the biggie, because the money that goes for this is going to go for making molds from the 3D prints, and then I'm going to start making resin molds in short batches and send them to those in the Kickstarter that wish to have them. So it'll take me a while because it's just me, but I can sit there and make molds all day long. But along with this piece that I'm building on right now, the other piece is this thing that I've got already ready to go. I've got to test it out though. Let me change the color so you can actually see it. That's not the greatest color in the world. Something like that, I guess. So it's kind of a dwarven little area. Yeah, hobbit area. Hobbitesses live in this. You got little squirrels that live on the side of it. Just generic ones. You don't need to be, too detailed, because you're not going to be able to see that small. A little bird. There's a couple of birds that's perched up on the top. Some ferns. A little squirrel on the side. He just likes to sit there. But it's a simple little tree that is going to be part of the collection. And it'll go with this. I'm doing, also I'll be making a fairy ring, the ring of mushrooms. That'll be one of the pieces. And then I'll be doing like a wishing well, things like that. Things that would fit into kind of an enchanted forest. And those pieces will go together in a set. And then they can, yeah, it's going to all be more fantasy or like fairy tale style rather than just traditional Dungeons and Dragons or RPGs or fantasy and things like that. So that it kind of caters to everything else. So, um, so that's the plan that I'm going for right now. Is I'm going to be building a few more. I was actually looking at a couple other things that I was going to build. I have a list here. Yeah. So, like, besides the trees, the wishing well, the fairy ring, some of the things they don't have is fauna, just like deer and rabbits and things like that. So those will be in a little set, and all of this will be in a 1-inch fitting grid. So the idea is that if they have a boring, generic forest looking down battle map that doesn't have anything but just like flat boringness, they can lay these things and it'll fit perfectly on the grid, and they can lay it however they want. So it's kind of like scatter terrain, but it will fit the terrain battle maps pretty well. So that'll be good. Camping sets and things like that. But it's supposed to be for fairy tales and things like that. It'll fit a lot better. So, but yeah, that'll be coming up in the fall at some point. And like I said, I want to get a collection of vacuum containers so that I can put the molds the injection molds into those and suck out all the air and have a better chance of not having any air bubbles and things like that. And the more I get of those, the more I'm just going to fill up my apartment and start just going to town. I can make a whole bunch of them at one point. But we'll see just how much work I'm going to have to do. Because I'd like to do it where I can set up resin molds for everybody. So that if they don't have a 3D printer, they can go for that, for the resin ones. But if it gets out of hand where there's like, 1,000 people that back the thing and I've got 3,000 things I've got to mold, that may take me plenty of time to do it. So the resin casting is not that difficult. It's actually, yeah, and that's the progress. Right now I just do 3D modeling for printing. So people with 3D printers, that's what I started out with doing. But I'm going to start doing resin casting. It's not that difficult. The important thing is the air bubbles. That's one of the big ones. And the slow pours, when you're pouring your material in to make the mold itself, not the actual model, but the actual mold. It's really important that you get it in the right environment so that you don't have those air bubbles, which will cause a lot of problems. So I've done some molding in the past, not with the equipment that I've had. I've just done it just on the countertop, and you can do that with. I mean, you could use Legos. You could honestly build a little casing just with Legos, and put your little model inside the casing. Fill the whole thing up with your material for the molding. It's a two-part type of material that you basically mix together and makes a little kind of bluish teal. Well, it kind of looks like the model color on the screen. And then you pour it in and over, completely covering your model. Let it dry, making sure there's some air holes just to pull it out. And then, then you just basically pull in your resin and let it sit there and dry, and you're ready to go. And you can make a whole bunch of those that way. But yeah, I'm planning on doing that because there's enough people that are really wanting these models, but they don't have 3D printing capability, and I sympathize on that. Shapeways is kind of expensive, and not everybody wants to get into 3D printing yet. They will, but not yet. So I'm going to cater to that. And hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be able to get something good. But I'm not going to be able to make molds, resin casting for, a few thousand people. That's just me. Oh, perfect. Okay, well then there you go. That'll be the better thing. And I don't have a problem with people making their own casting. If they 3D print, if they purchase the file, oh yeah, me. Yeah, I guess I can print it off for you. Yeah, but yeah, if people purchase the actual files, I don't have a problem with people pouring their own casting as long as they're not selling it. Or if they are, they're contacting me for it. I may just be able to print for everybody. Yeah, just everybody send the files to me, and I start printing for the rest of my life. Yeah, the idea is to get more and more equipment that I can be able to do it, because it's always just going to be me. There's not going to be multiple people doing this, so. It should be alright. Alright, let's get this thing going. We got 24 more minutes, and then we got to get this thing done. Yeah, that's what the most of this Kickstarter is going to go more on the fantasy side. There'll be several different genres that'll be in small collections. So you're going to have one that's kind of a fairy tale sort of thing, you know, wishing well, a dwarf house in a tree, um, things like that. There'll be one for the desert that I'm going to work on, and that's going to be kind of dark sun, I guess, or maybe even Numenera. But yeah, it's going to. The initial plan is going to be fantasy based. The last Kickstarter was all sci-fi, so this one's going to be fantasy instead. It tends to be more popular. But the sci-fi stuff from last Kickstarter will still be available for add-ons, and that'll be cheap. Yeah, just those will be at a premium though, because I won't be able to print off or paint off a whole bunch. But ideally, the resin ones, uh, some of them will come painted and some of them won't. I mean, it's going to be in small batches. I'm going to be only able to do the resin casting in small batches in general. And of those, not all of them are going to be painted. So to answer your question, yeah, but there won't be many of them, at least for now. Things in the future, yeah. Be nice to be able to get them all painted. Might be able to arrange for getting them to be painted by someone else and then go that route. So right now I am just putting in random pieces of the tree here because I don't want to get anything uniformed at all. I want it to be completely unorthodox. No, and this right now is just the basic of the branches. Once they're all put together, then I'll go back over there with essentially a sculpting tool that will allow me to pull out and push in different areas, and that'll really give that little bump out of all those little prickly areas that you would see on a pine tree. Again, this is stylized. It's not going to be completely accurate because that's not the direction I'm going for. But bringing in just random pieces should do the trick. And then, theoretically, once we get down to a point where we're starting to smooth it out, after we add a whole bunch of different bump outs, if I go in like that, and you'll have different layers as it goes out. And the reason why I'm not making it more of a traditional tree where there's more overhang in each tier, and that's because of the printing of it. 3D printing, it does not like to print out overhang too far. You can print out a little bit of an overhang, but you can't print out too far, and that's because it essentially it prints it by layer. So one layer of melted plastic is this square right here, and then it goes back over, and let's say it builds another set layer, not this thick, but let's just, for argument's sake, and it prints out another layer like that. Well, the way it would print for wider pieces, it doesn't have anything to support it on because it has to actually it has to actually form the plastic onto something underneath it. And if there's nothing there, if it's, say, an overhang like this, then what it does is it builds a support. And it's a breakable piece, the support is, and you basically just take some pliers, or sometimes you can take your fingers and just pop them right off. If you get decent filament plastic, it will pop right off, and basically it'll look like, from a top view, the supports will be like this, but not. It'll be perfectly in 90-degree turns and much tighter than this, but that will be basically it. And if I go into and extrude the thing, let's see if I can. Yeah. So basically, it will look like that, and it will fit right underneath your lip, and you just basically just break all that off. Now that is wasted material, in my opinion. I mean, you have to. There's certain things you just can't avoid, and in this regard, I'm going to have a whole bunch of support under here because that's just part of the tree. It has to go that way. But if I had more overhang on the second and third and fourth tiers, then I'd have support in between the two. And I don't want to do that because it's just a mess cleaning up support, and you want to try to keep it as minimal as possible. So I'm making it more like an ice cream cone, and that way it sort of looks like it. And again, just trying to make it so that it is believable, presentable, and good enough because it's a tree, after all. On other things we will spend more time on, but not on this. And I am bringing this all back down so it's nice and comes out like that, because it gives it more of a sloping pattern to it. And again, it really doesn't matter how we're doing this, because in the end, it all just looks, you take it all together as a whole. Like that. Now a printer will print a 45-degree angle fairly well. And by a 45, I mean from here, not, this would be a 90-degree angle, 45 would be like at a diagonal. Some of them struggle at 45 degrees because they'll print them in a tier step. But some printers are better than others when it comes to that. If you can get it less than 45, you get it down to 30 degrees, then you usually are pretty okay. Like for this, it will just have just enough of an overhang, and it'll keep building and building and building. So it won't be so much of an overhang it needs a support underneath it. So it's something to keep in mind when you're modeling, is to make sure that you're not overhanging so much that it's going to cause a problem in the printer. Let's get this thing going and get a bigger piece. And then bring these pieces up. F3 will take it back to wireframe so you can actually see through it. Because you always want to make sure that you're not selecting other vertices on accident. Bring that right back up. Now it's got a little slope to it. And because it doesn't matter, bringing this thing out. And why not bring this one out too? And again, we turn on smooth and group just to see that we got the general shape of it so far. If I was just making this for myself and not for molding purposes or anything like that, I would have this done a lot sooner. But because it's being sold, there's a little more time involved, and A little more effort. I'll probably have this finished up Monday. I'm going to be back live broadcasting every Monday and Wednesday at 6 o'clock Central Time p.m. I'll be modeling twice a week now that I've gotten up and running with Twitch. And we'll be going through the list of all the different things that's going to be going in the Kickstarter. So everything that I model here will be available for sale once I get it printed out and tested. And that's one of the big things that I want to do this year that I wasn't able to do quite so much last year, is printing out everything and making sure that everything looks good before they get printed out. And now that I've got a new printer that's about here, and so everything should be much better, much cleaner. There we go. Yeah, long way to go. But again, it's important to keep things rolling. Now that I want to kind of skip ahead, we'll do several of these at once. The majority of these done. Drag click to, but you always do F3 to see that you've selected stuff in the background when you drag click. F3 again to turn back. And there we go. Hit your bevel. It'll be the same setting as we've been using the whole time. It has a little bit of a memory to it, so the settings stay the same, and then you can go in there and modify it as you want to see. So we want to go in and move all these pieces up. Keep going. I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the feed, but I'm using a, if anybody was interested, I'm using a Space Pilot controller. And essentially what that is basically a cylinder handle joystick. And it allows me to rotate, zoom in, and pan all at once. And that way I don't have to use hotkeys on the keyboard and my mouse to move things around. Some people like that. I don't. I firmly believe that space pilots are the way to go, and any 3D artist should have one. You can get the knobs. They're just essentially a piece of, it's just a cylinder with a weight at the bottom to keep it nice and weighted down the bottom so they don't tip over. They've got some weight to it. And you can get them really cheap, under $100 now. Yeah, you definitely don't want to argue with an astronaut. So that's just good, sensible thinking right there. And let's see. All right, we got that. And what are we going to do with the base here? We want to pull some of these out. You mentioned earlier, I don't want symmetry too much. So we'll do that. Again, that's getting close to 45 right there. So to be safe, we'll bring it back just a tad bit, and hope. And that's what testing, print testing, will be all about. Finding out whether it's whether I've got the right angle or not. There's that. Get these here, and that one there. There. And again, it's always checking to see what it's gonna, more or less, for how you're going. And I've got default shading on. It should be on facets. Facets makes it more like you can actually kind of see the different levels of the layers when I turn on facets. You can actually, I can zoom in a little bit. You can see the polygons, but they represent some of the detail that you would have if you 3D printed it. Now, you could set your printer to a much thinner layer so that it's printing off at small as like 0.2 millimeters. Really, really thin layers, and you'll have a clean, smooth finish. So some of these polys won't, this faceted look to it won't be quite that apparent when you print it off. And again, we'll crank up the poly count even more than this. Basically, you go in here and there's a turbo smooth up in my modifier panel over here on the right. And you can set the iterations, which basically just, it multiplies the number of polygons. So it just doubles and triples and quadruples, and it keeps going and going until you hurt your computer and it starts to catch on fire. Because it can't calculate that number of poly count. But for a good computer, you can crank that up quite a high number of iterations. And that'll be right before you export it as an STL file, which is the universal file that you use for every printing case. So, all right. So there's that. That's rows 1, 2, and 3 for the most part. And then again, you can always go back, grab your edge in various places. Do the same thing for this. Do that. Get a little bit of inconsistency right here. Oops, I want the vertical pieces like that. Not every one of them, just every few. That. That looks like an issue. That's a little bit too much. Bring it back a bit. All right. And then on Monday, we're going to go back in, finish up the second half, top part of these, which will go a lot quicker. The beginning part was mostly just tutorials for the first couple hours with people. I don't want to get that far. It's too much. And then we'll basically finish up the top half, which is basically the bottom half. And then the nice thing about this is once we make, because we're making 3 of these, you just bring over a copy, and then instead of it leaving it like that, you can actually just deform it, because they can all, I mean, the trees can be different sizes and all that. You can squeeze it down a little bit, even more for that matter, and then stretch it a little bit, and then you've got two different kinds of trees with the essentially no effort making a second tree, and you basically make 3 of those copies and just alter them a little bit, and then they have some differential look to them, but you haven't really done a whole lot of work on the second one. And from a perspective of being on here, basically, it's basically cheating. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. And now you know our secrets. So yeah, we'll go in there, and that way you'll have your 3 pieces, and then Dwarf can sit back here. And again, it's disproportionate. You're not going to have, you can make these things bigger and taller, which we could. And shoot, you can make them real tall for that matter. I mean, it's, you know, you can make them super tall. But again, you're just basically giving them an idea that there's a cluster of trees right there. Then besides those 3 trees, then what we're going to do is actually build the base. That'll probably be on Wednesday. And we'll actually go in there and build the actual grid. It's going to not be so perfectly 2x3. It'll still fit a 2x3 just nicely. But instead of it being hard edges, which printers, 3D printers do not like 90-degree angles that much. Like these sharp angles, these edges, they don't like them. They tend to curve unless you work on it really well and put some good adhesive on the print bed so that it doesn't peel itself off. But what we'll do is make it so that it is, just generally speaking, it'll fit the 2x3 kind of like this, but it'll look more natural like that. And then once you have your basic shape there, you're still got it. It's going to fit nicely on a 2x3, close enough that everybody's just going to be satisfied by this shape. But then you can go in there and actually build the grass and build it so that the grass is, it's chaos on, you know, you'll have different levels of height with the grass. It'll be inconsistent, which is what you want. But it'll all be uniformed level at the top, so that when you set a mini on it, it's not going to fall down or tilt or, you know, slip on one of the cracks in between the grass and things like that. And when you can put like vegetation, you know, some little bitty mushrooms and things like that, because again, it's all going to be kind of an enchanted forest collection sort of thing. So it'll fit fantasy just fine, but there's just more of a magic involved in it. So you can, guess you can say fae or something like that, fae folk or something. All right. Well, like I said, this was just the preliminary I did on Saturday night, just for the initial launch, kind of testing out Twitch itself, kind of seeing what this does. I'm already going to be modeling all these, so there's been enough people that have been asking about it. Just a matter of them finding time to log in and watch it. So we're going to be broadcasting Monday nights and Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can check your listings and figure out what time it is if you're in a different time zone. But we're going to do this regularly, once every week, and I guess twice a week now. All right, guys, I got to get out. I'm going to shut down here. I appreciate you guys showing up and watching the last bit of the video broadcast. Really appreciate you guys showing up and checking it out. This is a lot of fun, and keep in time with the Facebook page. I'll throw that out there for those who are actually in it. It's going to be this. is the feed. That's where you can go and follow along if you need to, if you're interested. There's Twitter and Instagram if you're interested in that. You just search for Simple Poly Tricks. It'll be there. And that way you'll know when I go live. I'll be doing a blast on all the social medias to remind everybody that I'm on, and then give the link. They can pop on, see it, and come and go as they please. So, all right, guys, this will do it here. I'm running a little late, so I will shut down and see you guys Monday. Hopefully see everybody back, and until then, thanks a lot. Take care.